Back in May of 2023, I covered mainly the figures that I wanted to collect out of the Across the Spider-Verse wave in one giant video, citing it as the only real wave to collect for 2023 out of Marvel Legends because, as many of you know, I feel some type of way about that series, with the lack of accessories, quality, and the way that Marvel Legends has been kind of treating their customers. I didn't really think that they were worthy of actually checking out their entire wave, mainly because of the uniqueness of the Across the Spider-Verse aesthetic. Well, since then, the movie has been released, and along with it, S.H.Figuarts has decided to take a crack at Miles and Gwen. Now that I got the figures in hand, it's time to compare who put out the better Across the Spider-Verse figures. I'm sure we've all been in the theater catching the latest superhero flick, but a lot of those movies recently have been kind of long, and after a while that bulky wallet starts to leave a crater on the dark side of the moon. Well, your cheeks have been saved by Exter. I've partnered with them to showcase some of the sleek, elegant wallets that are currently available anywhere right now. About half the size of your typical wallet while still having enough space for all of your cards. They keep them protected with durable materials such as vegan Italian leather or space-grade aluminum, and also keeps them secure from skimmers. These are some trying times we're in, and you can never be too careful. So Exter makes sure to line their wallets up with RFID protection, but best of all, you can do this. Pressing one button grants immediate access to all of your cards in an instant, so the next time you take out your card at the exact moment you missed out on that new exclusive figure pre-order, take comfort in knowing that the card is safe, secure, and comes out of an Exter wallet. And you can get yours too by using the link in the description, and while you're checking that out, get a whopping 25% off your order when you check out using that link or typing in my promo code DarkSpiderDavid. I want to thank Exter for sponsoring this video. So I'm gonna start with Miles here as far as the actual figures I'm gonna be comparing one to one. And if you guys remember from that big video back in May, you'll notice that one of the things that I cited was that even though we are getting a little bit less plastic when it comes to the actual bulk of the figures, they're very respectful of the source material. They're very faithful to the actual portrayal that we have of those characters in the Across the Spider-Verse movie because of that unique style of art and the way that these characters are actually portrayed and designed. And I thought that it was actually a pretty faithful one-to-one representation of the figures. Well, since then, I've been kind of proven just a smidget wrong, because even though I still think that this is actually one of the finer Marvel Legends that we've gotten in some time, mainly because you're getting a pretty modest figure here with great articulation as far as the actual mobility of the joints, and modest build quality as far as, like I said, the limbs, the construction of the torso. Even if it feels a little finicky around the elbow and knee area, that's mainly attributed to the actual style of the character. You know, they're not meant to be very bulky, very, really thick and actually robust character representations. Miles is supposed to be a lankier physique, so he's naturally going to have this aesthetic, and it makes sense for him. And overall, I was just pleasantly surprised with the actual color applications they were able to put on the figure, most notably the hints of the little blue that kind of blends in well with the red and black. But I've come a long way to actually note exactly how he is actually represented on screen, and it turns out that there's several little details about this Marvel Legends that I ultimately ended up getting wrong, especially when an awful lot of the problems that Marvel Legends deals with is still plaguing the Across the Spider-Verse figures, most notably the lack of accessories. So, let's take a look and exactly see what Figuarts has to offer. And here he is. He is going to have a little bit of trouble balancing himself out because, once again, they retain the faithfulness of the lanky physique that Miles has in this movie. However, I was just so surprised by said physique because, frankly, I'll be honest with some of you, I was adamant about Figuarts' versions of these characters because some of those promo shots that were released earlier in the year kind of gave me the impression that they were going to go for an overly bulk physique, especially around the shoulder and chest area. There was something about Miles' portrayal in those photos that just looked too big, too bulky, too muscular for his physique, especially since he mentions in the movie that he's only about 15 or 16 years old. I was like, what the hell? Did he go through a growth spurt? He's taking roids? But it turns out that the final release by S.H.Figuarts here for Across the Spider-Verse Miles surpassed my expectations, and also very frankly reminded me that I got the actual impression from this Marvel Legends completely wrong as far as how faithful the actual costume is supposed to be. One gander at this figure alone just oozes proper representation of this character, and frankly, this is arguably the better version. That's obviously going to come with the territory of marking up the price from $25 to then pretty much an even $90 for the S.H.Figuarts Across the Spider-Verse Miles. But look exactly what it is that you're getting. You get a very firm and faithful representation of the character with the texture work on the chest. You can actually see the little rivets and the honeycomb design around the suit. And even though there are technical blue hints of that hue going alongside the suit, they're much more muted and much more better balanced versus that of this version of the character. It also doesn't look as padded as it does here on the around the torso area. It's a little bit more satin-like. And the actual proportioning is also a little better. He's a little taller, as you can see, but he doesn't look exactly as stretched out or as bad as it does over here. And I also noticed that the head sculpt is a little bit rounder than it is supposed to be over here. This one's a little bit more square, and the eyes are sculpted and lined a little better with better color application, especially with that little blue line that is happening alongside the outer rims of the lenses. It actually has this Oakley kind of look. And again, an awful lot of those qualities is going to come with the territory because it's got a lot more labor work behind it, but man, it's just so much of a night and day difference. And on top of it all, there's an awful lot of those little details that prove me wrong as far as how faithful this is supposed to be. Look at that spider symbol. The spider symbol is probably the biggest culprit on both the chest and the back. How in the hell did I not know that this is entirely the wrong symbols? And I did see a couple of comments, but frankly, my stubbornness didn't really want to believe it. It turns out that the symbols on both the front and the back for the Marvel Legends are completely wrong. This one's more on the rounded side that looks a little bit closer to that of the Into the Spider-Verse version versus the much more edged out and spiky look of the brand new suit. And you can see that there on the front, and you have pretty much a replicated version here on the back that is technically faithful to that of the movie. I don't know if I was having like a Mandela effect or something, but it turns out I got it completely wrong because this whole time I thought that that was accurate, and that was completely inaccurate. As you can see right there, the look is just night and day. You could argue that, this one's a little bit cooler. That falls on subjective eyes, but you can see right here that in terms of the actual look of how he's supposed to be on screen, this one's much more faithful, and overall the build quality and the actual paint applications fit much better and look a little bit much more fine and to the detail than that of the Marvel Legends. And you can see that you're definitely getting your money's worth should you pick this guy up. The only thing that the Marvel Legends was actually able to nail is the slight little blue hue here on the front of his face. He actually does have that in the movie, and the Figuarts does not have that. You can see right there that he has just an all black mask, and it makes a little sense for it to have the little blue hue. The only time that he doesn't have the blue anywhere on his body, frankly, is when he enters other dimensions other than his own, especially when he interacts with Spider-Man India in Mumbatan. That's actually where he's completely black, and that's mainly because of the art style in that universe. Whereas when he's in his home universe, he actually does have the blue hues, especially the one on his face. And so that's probably the only mild inaccuracy that Figuarts kind of dropped the ball on slightly, but overall, I am pleasantly surprised with how much more faithful the Figuarts version is here. And like I said, even though $90 can come off as a little bit steep, it's so far, frankly, feeling kind of worth it, even though the only other little discrepancy is balancing him out and making sure that he actually stands on his own without any other prior assistance, because the Marvel Legends one is a bit stockier on the feet and he's able to stand no problem. But this one, because of how much more accurate the ankles and the actual physique of the legs are, he's going to be a little bit on the top heavy side, so you have to do a little bit of extra work to get him to balance just right. And what's on board for the figure is not the only thing that Figuarts was obviously going to nail a little better. You have those alternate Miles heads. So you could see that this is the Marvel Legends one. This is the Figuarts one. And you could see, once again, we have another night and day difference, but not without its own little falter by Figuarts. That, just because sometimes they have the better tools, there could be a little bit of an underdog element happening with Marvel Legends in this specific wave, especially when you take into account that maybe this time Marvel Legends had a little bit of extra time considering the delays that the movie was facing. So you see right here that the Figuarts head is definitely better painted, better sculpted. You have much more personality and a very accurate look of the render you pretty much get in movie. This is pretty much a fully 3D realized render of Miles Morales from Across the Spider-Verse. And you see that the skin tone is actually quite accurate to that of the Marvel Legends one. He's a little bit too dark right there, and this is much more akin to how he looked like in the movie. He's even got the slight little smirk, and you can actually see a little bit of a scrunch happening there on his brow to give him that look that Uncle Aaron was trying to train him on with the little hey, you know, and it actually comes through fairly well. Where it does kind of lose me just a little bit is actually the hair. It's sculpted very beautifully there on top. It's actually pretty close to that of the Marvel Legends. But frankly, what do they do to my man's fade? Look at that. I'm sorry, but Marvel Legends actually wins a little bit on the style points. You know, the exaggerated swagger Marvel Legends was able to accrue here with their sculpt is actually a little better. Though the fade happens a little bit more here towards the back, it has this little ridge here where it feels like it's almost a separated piece. And you can actually see the dividing line between the face piece and the head piece, or the hair piece rather. And so they didn't do a very remarkable job of trying to make sure that these two pieces feel better blended with each other versus that of the Marvel Legends. You can see right here that this feels like an entire head piece, whereas here it looks like I'm feeling two pieces that just happen to be glued together. As greatly sculpted as they are, they could have done a better job of making sure that that fade felt a little bit more natural with each other. So that's the only thing that I will admit Marvel Legends probably was able to nail a little bit better when it comes to this head sculpt. Overall though, you can see right there that this is not only an amazing look for a neutral head of Miles Morales, but that's not all. They threw in a third head that's unmasked. Unfortunately, a little bit of that fade issues with the piece and the little dividing line is still happening here at the top part of the head. But at least this time around, we get the awesome, very personality-fueled, smiling smirk, or you could say worried look, because this is also the same look that Miles has whenever he is either flunking Spanish, like he is in the movie, or he is doing something that Gwen specifically told him not to do. And so you're able to get this emotion down pat with this head sculpt, and it's beautiful that Figuarts was not only able to nail it with the neutral head sculpt for the masked Spidey head, but then the two Miles. And if that wasn't enough, you get the added neck stump that is a little weird separated, but this is meant to give him a much more natural look when you have the unmasked head sculpts on him. So that way it looks like it's riding down here towards the bottom, and so everything feels a bit more premium in quality. But then it gets even better because even though they didn't throw in another masked head sculpt, they threw in additional much more open, I guess you could say surprised look lenses that you're able to swap for the neutral ones he's got on. It's very easy. You just got to get your nail to dig in there, remove the lenses, and then fit these in with these pegs that are on the back, and they feel pretty snug in place. They never feel loose or like they're about to fall off. But on top of that, they look actually pretty awesome on him, and it's supposed to give him this very surprised look that's very reminiscent of whenever he's either jumping in between dimensions or during the end credit sequence. If you know, you know. But I just love this look. This combined with, again, the faithfulness of how all this looks right here versus that of the Marvel Legends. Again, you're pretty much getting what you paid for. And that's a saying that goes a long way with Figuarts. Again, despite a little bit of that balancing act you have to perform with these ankles, which frankly, I guess is the perfect segue into one of the things that is going to come with the territory of paying the extra big bucks for a Figuarts figure, and that's going to be the articulation. Though sometimes those points of mobility can be argued to be having their own little trade-offs versus that of a Marvel Legends, especially when you take that big price tag into consideration. So since we saw that we have alternate hands and an alternate neck stump to be able to swap them all out, you're naturally going to have not one but two joints at the neck to be able to not only rotate the head a full 360 degrees, at least that's what you would come to expect, but mine was a little bit on the snug side on that top joint, so you're not really able to rotate. He's able to look left and right, but you can kind of hear a little bit that he starts to give me a little bit of resistance. You hear that little squeaking happening with the plastic, I'm a little nervous to give it a full rotation, at least on the top joint. It's once we get to the bottom neck joint, however, that he's able to flex a little bit more towards his shoulders. But really, when it comes down to it, that's really about it as far as rotation. Tilting up and down is absolutely no problem because you get movement on the top joint and the bottom one, as well as tilting from side to side, as you can see right there. So very expressive, but I really wish that it would allow me to give me the full 360. I know, not natural for a human being to be able to do that, but this is still an action figure, so I still think that that's something that companies should take into consideration, whether you're someone as basic consumer as Marvel Legends, or hell, someone as top tier as Hot Toys. Yes, I said it. Then we get to the shoulders, where not only we have the ball joint inside that is able to have the arm rotate 360 degrees vertically, but also extend almost beyond the 180. I would argue that that's more so of a 225 degree angle look, right about right there. So he's able to extend almost all the way up like so. But of course, you're also going to have the butterfly joint in there that Figuarts likes to bake in for some extra shrugging and mobility towards the front, towards the back, as well as slight shrugging up and down, as you can see right there. And very fluid for this one, with absolutely no problems that I can detect thus far. A bicep joint that is able to rotate almost 360, but I do get a little bit of resistance when I get to about that angle right about right there, so I'm not gonna force it too much, but I could argue that it's actually a little bit better than that of the neck joint, I can tell you that. Then you do get two joints at the elbow that are fully able to bend all the way up like so. The ball joint at the wrist that is able to rotate 360 via the peg inside, and then tilt up and down, as you can see right there, to be able to move the hand inwards and outwards like that. But all of that fluid mobility and awesomeness comes to a halt with this torso joint, the mid-torso cut right about right there, that does a great job of extending towards the back and then crunching towards the front, but not without its very detrimental caveat. This is probably the only area where I have to give another point over to the Marvel Legends, because that hinge is very fluid, but also clicky to be able to keep it in place. The Figuarts has a little bit of squeak already happening with it. You can kind of hear it right there. I would argue it's a bit more audible than that of the neck joint. And frankly, that much more scary, because when it comes to rotation, there's virtually none. And you hear that squeaking? I'm scared because it feels like it's stuck. And what scares me the most is actually a problem that I have heard some other people mention about Figuarts figures, not just this one, but frankly, a lot of them, regardless of the property, is that sometimes it feels like there's like a, this is going to sound crazy, a time limit on some of these joints with their bodies. I heard some people mention that they had this problem with Toby, the Toby figure, the Toby Spider-Man, where one of their shoulders would be able to move up until a certain amount of time, and then afterwards it just started to stagnate and get squeaky like now my torso has. Which I would argue, when I pulled him out of the box, he was able to turn left and right on this mid-torso cut very freely, but then after a while, it started to get stuck. It's almost like it ran out of juice, so to speak. So if anyone's got any solutions to make sure that I don't break my mid-torso joint here with the way it's moving right now, because it just feels like it's unnaturally moving, and the torso is pretty much stuck up until I can come up with a solution, whether it be a hair dryer like I always do, or boiling water, or some kind of oiling kind of thing like a WD-40 supplement style of substance that I could put in there and make sure that my figure moves, because right now I'm a little scared to move this joint, and that could potentially be a buyer beware for folks if they were considering getting this figure and getting really down and jiggy with it as far as posability, because right now that could be a major problem. So that's something to take into consideration. But once we get to the waist, it's kind of a similar deal, where you do have a little bit of flexing towards the front and towards the back, as you can see right there, but you can hear an awful lot of that joint just having issues with itself, and you could pretty much forget about rotating, because it feels like it's bending, not really rotating, and I don't want to press my luck. As far as crunching, nothing is really happening right there, except for plastic just bending. So this torso could have been orchestrated much better than it actually is. Things do look a little bit more optimistic with the legs, however, where you're able to rotate them up about that angle right there, and towards the back about a even 45-degree angle right about right there, and some proper extension once you get past the little joint that kind of shrugs itself down. So once you extend the legs, you can get about that far, just a little shy of the 180-degree angle, and there is a little bit of shrugging going up and down on these joints, especially with the right one. The right one, surprisingly, no problem, especially when you extend. It's the left one that can kind of extend towards the left at the same degree as that of the right angle, but it doesn't do any kind of shrugging motion. So I don't know if that's just a defect on mine or if I haven't liberated the joint enough to be able to do that. Some slight swiveling with this swivel joint that you have right there, but I feel like it kind of comes at odds with each other, but it does manage to rotate slightly right about right there, as you can kind of see it detract itself from the red strip, the bleeding armpit design they have happening right there alongside the leg, but you are able to rotate them in place. Two joints at the knees that are fully able to bend all the way up right there, no problem. Those have always been very favorable of the figure. And then, of course, like I mentioned, those joints, despite how slightly loose and posability threatening they are because of the way of how thin they are, you are nevertheless able to move the ankle up and down very fluidly, as you can see right there. One would argue just a little too loose for my comfort, but you are able to pivot the ankles inwards and outwards and then fully rotate the foot, as you can see right there at the top part of the joint. So you are able to get some decent mobility there that will at least help out some poses. And you do get the toesies, though they do come a little short because they can only bend only about that far. So even though we're technically getting more joints as far as quantity with the Figuarts figure and the articulation, there's actually some areas where the Marvel Legends was able to excel as far as durability and actual peace of mind with the posability, especially with those ankles and that torso. That's the only division where Figuarts does fall a little bit and comes up short as far as those points accumulated. But at least you can rely on Figuarts to come in with the accessories to help out with that heavy lifting. Now, I'm not going to tackle all of them right now just yet. I've already covered a good chunk with the alternate heads, the neck stump, and the alternate eyes, but when it comes to the hands and the web strands, I'm going to wait a little longer to cover them in bulk with those of Gwen Stacy's, because I have a little bit of a blanket statement with those. And speaking of Gwen Stacy, let's get her in here. And unlike Miles, I would say that between the Figuarts and the Marvel Legends, the suit is actually pretty on par with each other and pretty screen accurate to what you see in the movie. It's only really the features that get, of course, by nature, amplified by Figuarts in the workload and the extra texture and the extra paint applications. You can see that the height difference is still going to be there just like it was with Miles, except it's still to scale with Miles. So she's not going to be much taller. She's going to be probably a couple inches, 1 or 2 inches shorter than him. And likewise, you can also see that an awful lot of the characteristics that make up her suit are still pretty much on par with each other. The black with the white, the little hints of the teal blue with the purple and the pink, and the lining webs alongside the gloves and the inside of the hood. It's all still there. It's all very much still Spider-Gwen, but it's the actual refinement of those details that really work. Most notably, the texturized feel and the grip that's happening on the black and white portions of her suit on the Figuarts. You can see right there, you can actually feel the textured grip happening alongside the thigh area, the black parts right here on the middle abdomen, the sleeves, the shoulders, all around. You can see that maybe a little bit of the black is raised slightly to be just a little bit more screen accurate than the Marvel Legends, mainly because of the real estate you're dealing with here on the 6-inch scale versus what is likely to be a little closer to the 7-inch with Figuarts. And much like Miles, you're going to have a little bit more lining happening alongside the lenses. Unlike the Marvel Legends, which simply just has the little pink rims painted on, or rather sculpted on, the head, but not much else is really going for her there, so you kind of have a bit of a static expression there that's not necessarily all that screen accurate. Whereas the Figuarts, you could see that the lenses actually feel separated from the rest of the head sculpt, and it's much much wider open, a little bit more expressive, a bit more realized, and much better looking, especially with the little black line happening alongside the pink rims of the Oakley glasses, or at least I'm assuming they're Oakley because Spider-Man always goes for Oakley glasses. That's just the nature of it. Ever since Raimi's Spider-Man. But it's always got that nice little sheen to it. You still have the webbing that's actually sculpted inside of the hood itself, but still painted in with the blue, and it's all fully realized here in Figuarts form. You even have a little bit of added sculpting for the shoes, that you have them a little bit raised. You actually have the shoelaces sculpted on top with some refined paintwork. So, like I said, you can argue that this Gwen Stacy from Figuarts is the remastered. It's like, this is Last of Us. This is Last of Us Part 1 on PS5. That's pretty much what you're really dealing with here, where they were able to build upon what was already kind of established with Marvel Legends. So I guess by that argument, you could say that maybe this is the better Marvel Legends that they were able to come up between the two because of how much more screen accurate she is. But of course, Figuarts was still able to take the strengths that they're known for and amplify them with this version of the character right here. And overall, the build quality is still there. It's still pretty solid, still a pretty accurate representation. And much like Miles, she comes with alternate unmasked heads. And that difference is, again, night and day. I know I sound like a broken record throughout the video, but the money really goes someplace, and that is in the quality. Now, that's not to say that the Marvel Legends was anything to scoff at from the beginning. That was actually still a pretty noteworthy head sculpt as far as paint applications. It just didn't really look 100% like Gwen Stacy as far as that expression that they put on her. Because even though the paintwork is still pretty solid, the sculpting is still pretty solid, and you can see how well they worked on the hair, the facial expression, there's something about it that's just a little off. However, just look at this Figuarts head sculpt. Look at that thing. It's pretty much a maquette. You know how they have those maquettes at the visual effects departments where they build an actual model of the character so that then they can render that into their computers to then animate, whether it be for a CG animated film like the Spider-Verse films, or a visual effect that's going to be incorporated into a live action film like the actual live action Spider-Man movies, etc. This pretty much is that at the smaller 1/10 or 1/12 scale, because look at that facial recognition that's happening right there with the Gwen Stacy model, the face, the paint. It's much more accurate to what we got in the movie. She's got that smirk while still having a little bit of refinement around the edges that look like that Gwen Stacy with the attitude. And you still have the piercing on the brow, the cut hair that is still longer than it was in the first movie. You have still the little pink highlights here, or the frosted pink tips towards the bottom here. But overall, it's just much better. Though, to be fair across the board, they could have worked a little extra on the neck stump, which I left connected here to her unmasked head because it's the only unmasked head that she came with, which is going to be this slightly elongated piece. That's probably the only real critique I'll give over to this headpiece, because as beautifully sculpted and painted as it is, they made this just a little too long. So when you do end up swapping the heads, frankly, I feel like they gave her a bit of a long neck. And when you compare it to that of the Marvel Legends, at least this one, despite having the lesser quality, it kind of flows on her shoulders a little better. So you could argue that to compensate for that neck problem, both figures also do come with the little hood pieces. That way you can make it seem like she has the hood put down. And they're pretty much both on par with each other, except you see that the hood has a little bit of extra pink shading on the inside to make it look like it's actually pulled down, as opposed to the completely solid white one on the Marvel Legends. So you're going to get some added paint value there. But even with this hood piece attached, that neck is still sticking out to me just a little bit too much. I don't know what it is. Something just feels kind of off about it. At least it pales in comparison to how off it is to swap the masked head for the alternate masked head. Unlike Miles, she did not come with extra lens pieces. Instead, they gave her a whole alternate head sculpt that is completely masked with this squinted expression on her lenses. But sadly, it's a bit of a chore to get the two heads swapped out, because naturally you're going to come into some problems with this hood piece. Taking the head off from the bottom of the neck stump is actually no problem. It comes up fairly easy. But once you do that, it's getting the head from inside to pop off that neck piece that's actually kind of annoying. You can see right here that it's going to take some struggles to get swapped. So I'm not even sure if I'm going to be able to do it for this video because of time constraints. But you can see that getting in there, you're gonna have to resort to either using some kind of tool, but if you don't want to risk damaging any aspect of the figure, let alone this head sculpt, you can technically use the little helping tool that Figuarts threw in here. It's technically used for other purposes, but I guess we're gonna have to resort to it in hopes that maybe we don't break either the head sculpt or the piece, the tool, and try to get this piece out so that we can swap the heads. But you can see right here, it's already a bit of a struggle. And I know that this was going to be an issue with a hooded figure like Gwen Stacy, but they could have made the process just a little bit more user-friendly, because right now, it's kind of a pain. So after some finagling and simply just letting gravity do most of the work, you can actually remove it. You can see right there that you have a fully realized, sculpted and painted inside portion of the hood, so that is awesome to see. And simply just removing the head from the fully clothed neck stump and simply just putting in the other one, you can have a squinted expression on her face to make it look like she's either very skeptical about what's going on, which is pretty much her feelings throughout the entirety of Across the Spider-Verse, or the way that she is when she's simply leaping off a building doing her badass pose. And there you go. It's quite a process, so you're gonna have to get used to it, and it definitely pales in comparison to the ease of access of that of Miles by simply just swapping out the lenses. So I kind of wish that they would have incorporated that into Spider-Gwen, but I guess if you take the hood into consideration, kind of makes sense that that wasn't going to happen. So it's just something you're gonna have to get used to, but for now, I'm happy to report that at least it was a little less tedious than I was already scared it was going to be. And the same thing could also be said about the articulation, which is pretty much on par with that of Miles. We already kind of spoiled it by the removal of the hooded piece and the swapping of the heads. Like Miles, you're going to have two joints, one at the top of the neck and one at the bottom, that allows full rotation, 360 degrees. Unlike Miles, you can actually rotate this one, so I don't really feel too much of a problem in terms of hindrance. And good tilting, well, actually, to be honest, because of the hood, you're not going to be able to tilt all that much like Miles, because it's going to come into conflict with the shoulder, so you can nudge it slightly up and down and slightly left to right, as you can see right there, but still much more expressive. When you finally get your thumb in there, you can rotate the head in place inside of the hood to just kind of give her a bit more of a hooded personality right there, or a hooded look, like she's peering over the top. Cool pose. No, wait, that's Scarlet Spider. Actually, there's that Mayfix Scarlet Spider. I might be thinking about picking that up. Anyways, once you get past the head joint, you're able to rotate the arms vertically 360 degrees, move them up and down. Actually, she can raise them almost all the way up. This is even better than that of Miles. That is astonishing. That is a full-on 180 vertically as well. Not only 360 degrees vertically, but you can actually lift it all the way across, like you see before you right there. She is meant to be the more acrobatic of the two, so this is pretty on character for her. And naturally, the butterfly joint inside can also shrug the shoulders in place, as well as being able to pivot them inwards and outwards, to the front and to the back, up and down. Biceps that are fully able to rotate 360 much more generously than that of Miles. But then we get to a slight hindrance that I discovered, and that's going to be the elbow joints. They are able to fully bend all the way up at 2 points of movement, but when you rotate them back in place, you have to be careful, because the way that mines were sculpted, they were sculpted in a way where they kind of have to be pressed into the tricep and the forearm, likewise on both ends when you kind of straighten the arm. If you don't do that, you're going to feel a little bit of pushback. So right here, you can kind of hear a little bit of squeaking. It kind of stops right about right there, and I thought to myself, like, did I do something wrong? But when I took a closer look, you'll notice that maybe mine were sculpted a little bit girthier when it comes to those elbow joints. So I have to kind of press in and kind of snugly tighten up or tuck in the elbow joint inside of the tricep. So that's just something to take into consideration. So yours might have that, but mileage may vary. I just know that happened to be on mine, and if it was one elbow, I'll be like, okay, that's a likely defect, but it's actually on both. So that's something you might have to be on the lookout for when you pick up your Figuarts Spider-Gwen. The wrists then continue in the true Figuarts form, where you're able to rotate at the ball joint 360 degrees, as well as move them inwards and outwards. Then we get to that torso joint, which was a problem for Miles, but it looks like it's a slightly lesser but still apparent problem for Gwen. You can slightly crunch towards the inside, but then really flexibly bend towards the back. Again, she's the much more athletic ballerina type of the two, but you can still hear a little bit of that squeakiness. And though it feels a little nicer to rotate left to right, it's still squeaking and it's still doing that thing. And again, it felt kind of timed. It felt like it was being a little bit more fluid at the beginning, but then after a couple of movements, it started to do that squeak. If I get a third figure, whether it be that Miguel O'Hara or Andrew or that integrated suit Tom, and I come across this problem again, that might have to play a role in my decision moving forward with Figuarts as a company, because that's a little bit scary. The waist is also similar to that of Miles, where you have a little bit of flexing towards the back and a little bit of crunch, but nothing happening really towards the sides, nor any kind of rotation found there. Unlike Miles, however, she has not only great mobility on the top legs, almost all the way up, as you can see right there, a full pirouette type of stance. I don't know my ballet terms, but anyways, you know that she's gonna have an awful lot of flexibility on the legs. You can move them all the way up right about right there, start to kind of peer off towards the sides like that, extend them towards the back about that far, but then of course full nearly 180 degree extension towards the sides. And unlike Miles, she can actually shrug the legs on both of them, on both joints. So it's not just one, you can flex them towards the bottom, shrug them up, shrug them down, etc. Naturally, those swivels there at the top of the thigh can also rotate, although I feel like they're a little bit tighter than that of Miles, but some mobility can still be found on there. She naturally does have the slightly thicker thighs, so that's probably going to come with the territory. Two joints at the knee that are fully able to bend all the way up right about right there. And though it's a little stiffer on mine because of the way that her shoes are built, you can still move the ankle joints up and down to have the foot follow suit, as well as slightly pivot, actually really pivot towards the outside, as well as towards the inside, and slightly rotate at the top of the joint where the shoelaces are tied, because that's an actual individual piece that's wrapped around, and that allows you the horizontal movement. And much like Miles, she has toes, but look at that. These can actually extend much further towards the top, so that is awesome to see. So pleasantly surprised that Gwen Stacy's articulation and Figuarts form is not only better of that of her original Marvel Legends counterpart, but hell, I would even argue that it's better than that of the Figuarts Miles I just covered. Naturally, you're going to have the torso joint still being a bit of a problem, but it's technically a lesser problem than that of Miles' torso joint, and you're going to have much more fluid mobility in some of those other joints, and the quantity is, even though it's not, leaps and bounds over that of the Marvel Legends, it's still a little bit better and much fonder than that of that counterpart. But here's the thing, that's still not to say that there's anything to scoff at as far as the articulation and the mobility of the original Marvel Legends. Her articulation is still something that is pretty considerate, since Marvel Legends has had some really shady practices with the mobility of their figures and the joints. At least you have some areas here that feel pretty on par with the character and on par with these Marvel Legends as far as value. But that's the articulation. Strictly the articulation. It is most definitely not the case when it comes to accessories. Now we can talk about those other accessories in bulk, because frankly, both Miles and Gwen come with pretty much the exact same accessories as far as the supplemental stuff you expect a company like Figuarts to throw in with their premium figures, let alone Spidey figures. So let's go down the roll call here. On the figure itself right now, you have the pair of neutral hands for both Miles and Gwen, but on the side you're gonna have of course, the web shooting hands, you're gonna have web holding hands, the stretched out wall crawling hands, and then an extra pair of what I like to call action dynamic free-falling hands. So for Miles, they're a little stretched out in a specific gesture that's very reminiscent of when he's falling through dimensions, or like I said, the end credit sequence. And then for Gwen, she actually has some that I personally really love, which is the karate chop hands that look very reminiscent of whenever she's doing some kind of fall, some very graceful, again, ballerina-like fall, or she's kind of cutting through the air as she's running across rooftops, or going through her montage, explaining her origin story like she was in Into the Spider-Verse. Apart from that, however, they come with the typical web strand accessories you've come to expect, not only from Figuarts, but literally from any company, hell, even Marvel Legends, when they actually want to consider throwing them in. which are going to be the short strand, the long strand, and then the uber long strand to make it look like they are mid-swing. A little bummed out that I understand only throwing in one really long strand, but typically they throw in 2 of the short and 2 of the medium ones. This time we only get 1 of each, so there was a bit of a cutback there as far as value thrown in. But here's the deal, that's all you get included for each of these $90 figures. What do you get for the $25 a pop Marvel Legends? Really? And yes, I covered the extra head accessories, and that's probably where the allocation of plastic went towards the extra hands, but they've done it before. There's been evidence of them throwing in the alternate hands along with web strands, or at least one more extra pair of hands for those Marvel Legends. They've done it in the past, but yet you're still going to keep the charge either at the same price as it was before with inflation, or probably uprise it here to the $25 price tag. Sure, you are multiplying that almost threefold with the Figuarts, but not only do you get higher quality figures that you see before you here that are much more screen accurate and much better detailed, better painted, better articulated in some cases, though the torsos are left to a little something to be desired. You then get those much more screen accurate and very beautiful alternate head sculpts, the extra abundant amount of hands. And even though I would have liked a little bit of inclusivity with the web strands to make it look a bit more dynamic, especially when you're posing the figures, you at least get these really awesome decorated bases to go with the figures, even if you're posing with them due to the translucent arm. Look at these things. Guys, I'll be lying like a bitch if I said that I didn't smile when I pulled these out of the box. I was expecting some kind of stand, some generic stand, because Figuarts tends to throw them in from time to time. But man, I was not expecting them to throw in decorated, on-brand, on-character bases for the characters' stands here, their display stands. You got, of course, the black with red accents for Miles with his specific symbol there, and you have the pink with the blue and her specific symbol for Gwen Stacy, or Spider-Gwen. And this is remarkable. It's very, very cool that you can pose them with these bases either in a museum pose or in a dynamic swinging pose, and you can visibly see that this is where that extra allocation of plastic or inclusivity went as far as those web strands are concerned. So if it came to sacrificing at least one of the extra pairs of web strands that we've already seen from time to time, again, not just from Figuarts, but even Mafex, I would even argue that they probably even have the same supplier because of how identical they look. At least it comes in the form of having these really cool bases. I'm sorry, Figuarts, but I think I'm gonna have to pull a Gordon Ramsay here. You've raised the bar, okay? Now let's keep it that way. And raise the bar they did as well for me as a customer of Figuarts, though there are some discrepancies found that I will still take into consideration making my next purchase, most notably those joints that start to stagnate after a little while, mainly here found in the torsos. And while we're on the subject of like missing plastic or missing little accessories that I think could have been nice to throw in, I just noticed there's no fisted hands either way for Miles or for Gwen, so that also would have been a little appreciated. There is just something so charming and compelling about how accurate they were able to really hone in on the detail, the paintwork for the alternate heads, but also the uniform, the suit, and what we've really seen in Across the Spider-Verse. And this is ultimately nailing it, where you have it in the I guess you could argue the 1/12 scale, but then you get the added value of the extra alternate heads, the lenses in the case of Miles, or the alternate head sculpt, the mask head sculpt for Gwen Stacy, the hands that sure are pretty staple for any Figuarts or any of these premium figures that you get for the higher price tag, but at least that value is still thrown in there. You get your web strands, but then you have those decorated bases, the articulation that is, even though I would have liked a couple of extra joints here and there, or at least, like I said, some joints that are able to flex in a way that still feels good in hand, there's still so much packed in here that still has not shaken my opinion that Figuarts simply makes better figures at this scale. Sure, they're not going to be the most budget friendly, and I'm still not scoffing at the fact that out of all of 2023 thus far, the Across the Spider-Verse figures are still some worthy highlights, at least for the standards and the likes of Marvel Legends, and that's still a wave to pick up should you be on the much more budget friendly side. But if you are able to shelve out a little bit of that extra money, especially for some worthwhile characters like your main two protagonists of Across the Spider-Verse, Miles and Gwen, I feel like so far you still can't go wrong with a company like Figuarts. And if I was to then firmly answer the question of who made the better Across the Spider-Verse figures, it's no question. It really is in fact Figuarts, because you ultimately do get what you paid for. But I still am pretty adamant that you shouldn't really turn away too much from the Marvel Legends should you be on a much more friendly budget. And if that budget allows it and you are in the market to be getting the Figuarts, Miles and Gwen from Across the Spider-Verse, there are going to be affiliate links in the description that you guys can use to pick up those figures. There is a little bit of a commission there that helps out the channel, but in the process, you guys can bring these home now and you guys can enjoy these in your collection, because if you are still a Figuarts collection and you were kind of on the fence as to whether or not these figures were worth it, especially knowing that the Marvel Legends are out there, then hopefully this video helped you out. And if it did, hit the thumbs up button, hit the thumbs down. If it didn't, comment down below what you guys think about these figures. Are they worth picking up, especially with that higher price tag? Or you're looking forward to the Miguel O'Hara one, even though it's going to be a bit of a wait for that one to finally come to market? Or are there other Figuarts Spidey figures that you're currently hunting down for, whether it be the integrated suit Tom, the Toby figure, the Andrew figure, which I think is starting to leak out there. There's some people that already have it in hand from Japan, or if you're here in the States, waiting for it to come either in August or September, and then later in the year or next year, Green Goblin, etc. You have much more coming down the pipeline. What are you guys looking forward to from Figuarts or Mayfix Medicom? And if you guys by some chance missed that original Marvel Legends Across the Spider-Verse video, you guys can find it showing up on screen right now. As always though, stay humble, and I'll see you later.